What is up, guys? CaptainKlark here from Adidat Gaming, and today I'm going to be talking about the Loch-n-Load, which had some changes in the Smissmas update. The video you're seeing now is the Loch-n-Load before the update, a little bit of footage that I recorded on Egypt, and then later I'm going to be showing you the new Loch-n-Load and what that means for TF2. I'll be explaining my opinions on the changes that were made to the Loch-n-Load, as well as explaining what I think the weapon should be in terms of what its stats should be. Because I definitely think the weapon is a little bit broken as of now. Not in terms of damage, but in terms of purpose, I guess. So I'll explain a bit more of that later, and we'll get to some of the footage of me playing with the new Loch-n-Load. Alright, so currently the Loch-n-Load has a couple changes from the stock grenade launcher. The first is a 20% damage bonus, which does not sound like a lot, but as Muselk kind of explained in his video about whether the Loch-n-Load is OP or not, that can make the difference between killing someone with 2 pills versus killing someone with 1 pill. I'm not going to go into detail about that, and if you want to get that full explanation, you can check out his video. And he's kind of the reason why I'm making this video to some degree, because I didn't really use the Loch-n-Load before that video. And so you can check that out in the description, and of course, link on screen as well. But anyways, there is that 20% damage bonus, and also a 25% projectile speed bonus, which enables you to track your targets more easily and to hit them more easily. There is a minus 25% clip size, which means it has 3 pipes per clip, and there is a minus 25% explosion radius, which means it has less splash damage, as well as the launched bombs or pipes shatter when they contact any surface other than an enemy player or building, meaning they do no damage. So when we're looking at a side grade to something like the grenade launcher or any other stock weapon, it's important to think about the upsides and downsides of using the weapon. And specifically in the changes, we can see a direct comparison between the upsides and downsides of the original Loch-n-Load versus the Smissmas update Loch-n-Load. So the first stat to compare between the two weapons, the original Loch-n-Load versus the Smissmas Loch-n-Load, is actually their damage. And if you look at the image, it looks the same. It says both do an additional 20% damage per shot. And while that is basically true, there is a little bit of a change that they made during the Smissmas update to make the Loch-n-Load a little bit less overpowered. Read directly from the patch notes, changes to base grenade damage variance now ensure the Loch-n-Load does not exceed 124 damage on a single hit. This essentially means that the Loch-n-Load will no longer be able to one-shot the low HP classes unless there is additional damage spread or damage variance on a server. This basically means that if you play on a server without damage spread, it will definitely not go above 124, but if you play one with damage spread, it'll do things above and below 124. This is actually a good change, I think. Personally, I've had many a time where you kind of just run into somebody and you shoot them and they instantly die because you can do 125 damage reliably on a single hit in close quarters. So I think this is actually a good change they implemented well. However, in conjunction with the rest of the changes they made, I don't think it holds up. So the second change to the Loch-n-Load that was made in the patch actually has to do with the downsides of the weapon. One of the original downsides was a 25% self-damage penalty, meaning that if you were in the blast radius of the Loch-n-Load, you took an additional 25% damage from your own pills, essentially. And they removed that and replaced it with a 25% radius penalty, meaning that when you hit someone, there's less splash damage from the weapon. So the problem I have with this change is that it takes a really well-balanced downside to the Demo Man and replaces it with a downside that actually detracts from his core functionality. Basically, the additional 25% self-damage penalty limited the effectiveness of using the Loch-n-Load to just run directly at people and spam grenades in their face without actually aiming. The self-damage forced the user to stand back and aim their shots, which is actually the point of the weapon. It's to reward skilled shots with extra damage. So Valve took this really well-balanced downside of the weapon and, as I said, replaced it with something that limits the core functionality of the Demo Man. By reducing his damage radius, they effectively limited his ability to do splash damage and to deny areas. The Demo Man's purpose in Team Fortress 2 is area denial. The thing Demo Men are most effective at is keeping the enemy team off of important access points, whether it's the payload cart, the hill and Koth, or control points and control points. Unless, of course, you want to just run around shield panning people. So by limiting the Demo Man's ability to do splash damage, he essentially gets a nerf when using this weapon because he's less effective at area denial, which is not really exactly the purpose of choosing the Demo Man class. It limits his ability to defend points and to control areas that are really key and to really command the areas that he needs to be in charge of. So when Valve introduced these new downsides to the Loch-n-Load, I must say I was a little bit disappointed because it took a very good and well-balanced downside and replaced it with something that they thought of as an equal downside, but that was really just something that limited the core functionality of the Demo Man and not specifically the Loch-n-Load's overpoweredness. But anyways, I'm rambling. Let's move on to the next change that they made, which was actually a change in the clip size, which is supposed to be an upside, but that I think was a poorly implemented one. Essentially, the original Loch-n-Load had 2 pills per clip. It had a minus 50% clip size, and they changed that in the recent update to be a minus 25% clip size. So instead of having 2 shots per clip, it has 3 shots per clip, which doesn't make sense to me for a couple reasons. One, look at the model. The Loch-n-Load clearly has 2 pipes in its clip for a reason, or at least should have 2 pipes in each clip for a reason, and it's because there's 2 barrels. It's supposed to have 1 grenade loaded in the bottom barrel and 1 grenade loaded in the top barrel. So by putting a third in there somewhere, where does that go? Does one of the barrels double up and get a 3rd pill? Or, like, it just doesn't make any sense where this 3rd grenade would be going. Of course, there are various skin makers and modders in the TF2 community who have sought to remedy this. One of them is a triple barreled Loch-n-Load model, which I will definitely be using because it just makes a lot more sense to me. But to be honest, the view model issue is kind of a nitpick, and there's actually a much bigger problem with having 3 grenades per clip, which completely destroys the purpose of having this weapon in the first place, in my opinion. As I've probably said before like 20 bajillion times already in this video, the purpose of the Loch-n-Load is to reward skilled players who can aim well with extra damage. So by giving them a 3rd pill so that they have to rely less on their aim and can spam a little bit more, even though it's just 1 extra pill, it gives players the ability to spam grenades a little bit more. And that kind of removes from the purpose of having this weapon as a skilled shot weapon that requires aim and timing to use. So for me, giving a skilled shot weapon an upside like this, allowing people to spam just that little bit extra, is just a really bad design flaw. And so I definitely don't think that this is a valid change to be making to the weapon. So I feel like they changed this weapon to be something that's a little bit less useful for demo men, something that, you know, it went from this skill shot weapon to something that's a lot less useful, and it went from something that really required accuracy to something that could be spammed rather easily. Now you may be wondering, alright Clark, you've ranted quite enough. What would you do to the Loch-n-Load if you had your way? And interestingly enough, the changes I would make to the Loch-n-Load are kind of a combination of the original Loch-n-Load and the new Loch-n-Load. I would start off with keeping the damage bonus of plus 20% the same, but keeping the new update damage numbers so that it's impossible to one-shot many of the low HP classes when they're at full health. I would also go through and keep the projectile speed the same at plus 25%, because that aids in aiming and direct firing against quick moving targets, and I think that makes a lot of sense for this weapon. I would change the clip size from, instead of being minus 25% to minus 50%, because it makes more sense with the view model and with the purpose of the weapon. I don't think it makes sense having 3 pills per clip. I would also at least add the 25% self-damage penalty, and whether they want to use it to replace the explosion radius penalty or if they want to keep the explosion radius penalty as well. Either way, I think that just adding that self-damage penalty is something that was a good thing to have with the weapon. And finally, I would actually change the launched bombs shatter on surfaces. I don't think removing it is the right solution. I just think that kind of reducing the downside of it a little bit would be a good thing, because it really limits the demo man's ability to use area denial. I would make it perhaps like the loose cannon, where when it contacts a surface it does a lot less damage, but it doesn't completely destroy itself and become useless. But anyways, that's my thoughts on the current state of the Loch-n-Load and, you know, the changes that they made and what I would do with it, because I think that the changes that I was thinking of are actually good. They would make a good weapon, I think. So anyways, I'd love to hear what you guys think about this whole topic. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear that. Your thoughts about my new version of the Loch-n-Load that I would like to see get implemented. Your thoughts on the old Loch-n-Load and the Loch-n-Load Smissmas version. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this commentary, because it was it's the first time I've ever really done a TF2 commentary. We do end up losing this round, unfortunately, but nonetheless, I had a lot of fun making this video. So thank you guys. I'll see you in the next one.